Get ready. We're going to get a lot of readings and a lot of gospels about the end of the world. And the reason we're getting those is because we've entered the season of the Holy Cross. The season of the Holy Cross is the last season of our liturgical year. And in the last season of our liturgical year, the Church has us think about the end of the world. And the good news is that, as we said a couple weeks ago, we know everything ends in victory. The cross is a symbol of victory. But the way the discussion about the end of the world came up today in the gospel was a little bit strange. Nobody asked Jesus about the end of the world. They asked him about the temple. The temple, the building where the Jews worship. And Jesus starts talking about the end of the world. Why? Because the temple is a microcosm of the universe. And so there are a lot of temples. Anything that holds God is a temple. And so the Jewish building of worship was a temple, but all of creation is also a temple. And if you read Genesis very closely, when God is making the world, he's describing creation as though it were a temple. So the world is a temple, and that's why Jesus can talk to you about the end of the world when he's talking to you about the end of the temple. And there's a third temple that we'll talk about too. But let's talk about the temple of the world for a moment, the temple of creation. Another way we might describe this is the temple of the environment. I think the environment is the term that our world or our culture might use as well. And I think gospels like this are a reminder to us that care for the environment is a Catholic idea. That we are called, as early as the book of Genesis, to be stewards of the environment, to be stewards of the created world, and to do it for a very specific reason. And this is the part that you're not going to hear from the world. It's because nature, the environment, reveals God to us. Again, it's a temple. Creation is a temple where God dwells. That's the biblical understanding of creation. And so our job as stewards of the environment is to keep the environment as a place where God can reveal his presence. And I wrote a bulletin letter a few months ago about this amazing retreat that I did at Crater Lake. And I was reminded of how important this is. I was there for about 5 days, and by day 3, I was so immersed in God's creation. I didn't have a laptop with me. I didn't have any internet. I didn't even have my cell phone with me. What I had was a little satellite communicator, and I would send a text message to my parents every day to let them know that I was okay via satellite. No internet, no external communication. And I'll tell you, by day 3, I felt like I was surrounded by God. Like he was all around me and I couldn't escape him. My attention span increased. My prayer life deepened. When I prayed, I felt like I was talking to God and I felt like I was being heard. It was like God's presence was magnified. And the beauty of it is there was no searching. There was no looking into my heart and trying to find God, and is this his voice or is this not his voice, or where did God go? It was like I had put a magnifying glass in front of God, and I couldn't escape him. He was everywhere. And I wondered how I could ever think that God was hidden. This is the power of God's revelation through nature, through creation. And it's something we all need. And it's something that the Syriac fathers talk about non-stop. They call creation a book. Why? Because Revelation, you open the Bible is a book, it reveals God. And they say something very similar happens through nature. Nature is a book that you can read, and when you read it, you find God. But there's a very key difference between the way the church approaches care for the environment and sometimes the way the culture approaches it. Sometimes our culture will tell us that caring for the environment means hating on human beings, and that the only way to genuinely care for the environment is to remove people from them, as if we're only a bad thing when it comes to the environment. And that's very unbiblical. Not only are we part of the environment, because we are a part of God's creation, but we are stewards of the environment. Nature is better, or can be better, if we take our responsibility seriously. And I can give you an example of this. Some people might think that hunters are anti-environment people. They're actually not. They're very deeply in tune with ecosystems and with nature. And they play a vital role of keeping species, if they follow the rules, responsible hunting, if they keep species in check. Some species can become overpopulated, they disturb the balance of the ecosystem, and it actually hurts the environment. Responsible hunting is one of the ways we act as stewards to the environment, right? So the approach of care for the environment by removing people, that's unbiblical. That's not our role. Our role as part of the environment, as the high point of God's creation, and as stewards of the environment, is to care for it, to make it a place where God's presence can be revealed clearly. That is our role. That is our role. But that acts as a segue into the other temple that we need to talk about. The reason it's bad to reject humanity in favor of the environment is because we are the other temple. It's us, and more specifically, it's our body. Our body is a place where God dwells, and that makes us a temple. I wonder when was the last time we thought of our body that way, as a sacred dwelling of God. Because we look at our bodies and we value our bodies in all sorts of ways. We'll look at our body and say, my body is or is not valuable because it's beautiful or not beautiful. My body is or is not valuable because it's strong enough or it's too weak. My body has this flaw, therefore it's not valuable enough. None of these things are where the true value of your body comes from. The true value of your body is that it was made in the image and likeness of God, and it is a temple for God to dwell in. Everything else is secondary. And I think maybe we have a little bit of a culture where people want to reject their bodies, probably because they don't realize this. Our bodies, the value of our body is always dependent on something, on whether or not it's beautiful enough. And if it's not beautiful enough, what do? I reject it. The value of my body is dependent on whether or not I'm strong enough. And if I can't get strong enough, what do? I reject it. Your body is primarily sacred because God Himself dwells in it. And whether we are strong enough or beautiful enough doesn't change the fact that God is pleased to dwell in you. And nothing makes your body more valuable than that you are made in the image and the likeness of God. Remember to make sure that your children know this. That, yes, beauty is a beautiful thing. Beauty helps us to manifest that dignity, we might say. But they need to know that the number one thing that makes them valuable, whether or not they meet their own standards, whether or not they meet their friends' standards, whether or not they meet their culture standards or the magazine standards, the number one thing that makes their body valuable is the presence and love of God in their bodies. Our body is a temple. This building is a place where God dwells. But the other thing that's really important about the body We talk a lot about the Eucharist and how it's the full presence of God, right? Your body has an advantage that the Eucharist doesn't have. Because your body is made in the image and likeness of God. Bread and wine are not. This is why the doctrine of the Eucharist is so difficult for people to believe. It's been difficult since biblical times. It's because we're called to look at bread and wine and see a person, not really bread and wine, but the appearance of bread and wine, and see a person, Jesus Christ. And that's difficult. You are the stepping stone to make that easier on people, because you are made in the image and likeness of God. It's a lot easier for people to look at you and to look at your body and see Jesus Christ than it is for them to look at the Eucharist. And if we live as another Christ, and if we honor and reverence our bodies as God's temple well enough, we then make it a little bit easier for others to believe that Jesus Christ is truly present in the Eucharist. Because if God can live in us, then he can transform the bread and the wine as well. So all three of these temples are very closely related, aren't they? This is the temple where God dwells, but we help people to believe that when we honor the temple of our bodies, and all of it is an image of the temple of creation, where God reveals himself. 3 temples, 3 places where God lives on this earth. If God is not visible to others, it's not his fault, because he's here and he's in us. So let us make him visible.